But what I thought I'd do tonight is talk a bit about guitar tone, and how you figure out, if you're trying to learn a song and half of the song, in my mind anyway, is sounding like who you're trying to play, with. You're going to try to do not just the song, you try to do the performance of whoever it is that's playing it. And there's certain songs that have to sound like whoever they are, like U2 as an example. How do you figure that out? What are you listening for? What are the things that determine what the tone of an electric guitar, and to some degree an acoustic guitar, and bass as well, other instruments? What determines that? And how do you listen with a critical ear to figure out what you're listening for and why something sounds different than something else does? So what I'll do is sort of talk about what are some of those things, and then give you some examples. And then if there's songs that you guys want to, here's a song, how do they get that sound? And then we can kind of unpack that if there's a particular song that you have interest in. But if you're talking about finding your tone, what are the things that determine a guitar's tone broadly? If you're recording a guitar or playing, in a room, what makes the sound like it sounds?
Pickups and settings and amps.
Setups, amps, what other sorts of things?
The room.
The room will.
It's going to be how big the room is, how hard the surfaces are.
In terms of recording, in terms of the kind of like playing together, that makes some difference, but you're not really paying attention to it. But recording, absolutely it does. There's some studios that are noted for their rooms. Other things like, you say, Tom, it's like pickups and which pickups you pick. It also is like which particular guitar style you're playing broadly, Stratocaster, Telecaster, Les Paul, Rickenbacker, and other things. Those kinds of things determine it. Even things like how hard you hit the strings determines that. I'll show you some examples of that. So let's start with the kind of guitar, okay? If you think broadly about the kind of guitars that we're talking about, electric guitars we're talking about, we're talking about, it's like 5 or 6 different flavors, really. You've got Telecasters, you've got Stratocasters, which, because Leo Fender was Thomas Edison, he figured that out in like 1953 and got it perfect the first time, which is amazing. You have Les Pauls, which are also solid body guitars, but different for several reasons, which I'll talk about. You have things like Rickenbacker 12 strings, 12-string guitars, which have a different sound to them. And those are all sort of solid body guitars. Then you have hollow body guitars. You have those sort of jazz guitars like, Gibson ES-175s, those sort of big jazz jumbo things that people play, which are basically acoustic guitars with pickups on them for the purposes of this conversation. And then there's things that are sort of in between, like semi-hollow guitars, which are like an ES-335, those sort of Gibson guitars.
Like,
so
what did George Harrison play? Those big Gretsch?
He played Gretsch guitars, and Gretsch guitars were sort of, the ones he was playing were kind of semi-hollow, like an ES-335, but the particular pickups that those had on them were different sounding pickups than what the Gibson humbucker pickups were. They were, those are, what do they call them? I can't remember the name of the pickups, but they're particular Gretsch pickups, and they're humbucking. And what humbucking means is that there's a type of pickup, that kind of 2-coil pickup that you see. They were invented in the late 50s, but they're wired in a particular way where they cancel the hum. So if you play like a Telecaster with a single coil pickup, or a Stratocaster like you have, Bill, and you play it in a room where there's fluorescent lights, those things buzz like anything because it picks up that 60 cycle hum. A humbucking pickup is designed to cancel that. It's hum canceling. That's what they do. And the pickups on the Gibsons are like that, but they have different magnets and they're wired a little differently for technical reasons we won't get into. But they sound a little brighter, a little thinner, a little sparklier. So they're a little more edgy. So if you listen to like a Les Paul, they're with a humbucking pickup, standard Les Paul, typical Les Paul. I mean, it's a big, fat, powerful, warm sound. Stratocaster is thinner, brighter because of the nature of those single coil pickups. Telecasters are even more so thinner, brighter by design. And the reason for that is when Leo Fender was designing the Telecaster, which is like the late 40s, like 1948, 49, what he was looking for was two things. One was a guitar that didn't require all of the luthiery instrument building skill that, say, Gibson guitars had. Those are fine instruments. I mean, they're well made, they're crafted well, they have the set neck, they're all glued together. A Fender guitar is basically a manufactured guitar that you can screw together. It's bolted together. I mean, the parts are, interchangeable. I change the necks on my guitar all the time. That's a huge innovation. Nobody ever figured that out before. That's Leo Fender was all about how can I do it efficiently and cheaply, whereas Gibson was all about the artistry of guitar making, right? So there's that. And the other thing that Leo Fender was looking for, because he was in like Southern California in the late 40s, where country music was starting to sort of emerge, like the Buck Owens kind of Bakersfield sound. If people were playing these big jazz guitars in some raging honky tonk somewhere, you can't really hear him. So he's looking for a guitar that was really bright and really articulate. And he previously was making steel guitars and he knew how to make those kind of pickups. And that's what the Telecaster really was. It's a really bright, really articulate, really sharp, not in the sense of pitch, but sharp in the sense of attack. It's a kind of sound that comes out of that guitar that will cut through a crowd and you'll hear it. And that's what he's designing. That's what the Telecaster is specifically designed for. Stratocaster, similar to some degree. A Les Paul, a whole nother animal entirely. Les Paul was a jazz guitar player, So he was looking for something that was a solid body, but he was still looking for something that was sort of warm sounding, So there's that. Things like Rickenbackers, they're sort of, other animals. They're sort of in that sort of Gretsch class where the pickups are a little different and they're sort of hollow body. Jones was a solid body, George was a hollow body. But they're brighter sounding. So, there's a kind of unique sound. Let me preface a lot of this with, if there's a sound that you have in your head, do you have to be playing that particular instrument to get that particular sound? No. The quintessential jazz guitar are these big, jumbo hollow body things. Do you have to play one of those kind of things to sound like you're playing jazz? No, there's lots of examples of people who play that sort of warm sound playing a Telecaster, which seems really kind of counterintuitive, but you have the flexibility of, the tone knobs and how you set your amps and those kinds of things to dial in the sound that you want. So there's this school of thought, and I think it's pretty accurate, frankly, that is gear important? Yeah. I'm as big a gearhead as there is. I mean, Jesus. Look, I love that stuff. I mean, I'm fascinated by it, endlessly fascinated by it. That's why I monkey around with every guitar that I've got. Is it necessary? At the end of the day, no. I mean, most of it, if you have a sound in your head, you can sort of dial it in. And plus, a lot of the sound is in your hands anyway. So you do that. If you're looking at it, something like, Telecaster, that's that's pretty bright. That's that quintessential country. That. So that's what a Telecaster does really well. But can you get something that's sort of a you can get the kind of jazz sound out of a Telecaster. You just have to sort of dial it in. So it's not the obvious choice, but it's accessible. So that's.
Well, I have no idea how you do that stuff, though. I have no idea.
What I just did was instead of playing on the Telecaster, the front pickup, the bridge pickup.
You can't see the knobs.
Okay.
Here.
The Telecaster, the bridge pickup is always going to be brighter than the neck pickup. Always.
Okay.
Okay. And also, you hear where it's a little distorted when I hit. Some of it is even how hard you hit it is going to determine.
Yeah, so we're getting some sound distortion there, unfortunately. Hard to hear that.
Yeah, well, anyway, you hear how thin that is? That's because I'm playing with the bridge pickup and I'm playing it with the treble all the way up.
So
If I want it to be more of a jazz tone, I'm sorry, Court, what'd you say?
So you're flipping the switch between the pickups and then you're also messing with the knobs.
I'm messing with it up. So if I want more of a jazz tone, when I'm playing with that sort of country tone, that's tone is wide open and I'm playing the bridge pickup. If I want to play something that's more jazz-like, I switch it to the neck pickup, which is, and I roll the tone off, not all the way off, but down to maybe 3 or 4. So what it's doing is turning the tone down, is taking that sharp trebly attack out of it, and the sound is going to be warmer because it's a pickup that's up here rather than down closer to the bridge. So the kind of pickups you have makes a difference, but which pickups you're using makes a difference. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you listen to
So that guitar would have a choice between either pickup, but it would also have both, wouldn't it?
yeah, so the both one on this one. So it's sort of that sort of in between sound, but it's kind of when you blend pickups together, they do weird things that it doesn't sound like 2 pickups together, because what's happening is you're running the pickups through them in series rather than parallel. So it doesn't sound like 2 different pickups. It creates sort of one big pickup with these 2 things together and gives you a particular sound. So, even things like if you really want to go down the rabbit hole, if I move this pickup to about here, it's going to sound different because it's picking up different harmonics in the strings. Okay, so these pickup positions, where they are is really, really specific, because this is, that spot right there, that's right on top of that 12th harmonic, because that's what it wants to pick up. That's where the most resonant sound will be for that. So it's not accidental that pickup is right exactly where it is. So, but we don't have to worry about that because it's already done for us, right? So things like which pickup it's using. And usually, when I'm playing, I don't really use the tone knob very much, frankly, unless I'm doing something like that. Most leave it generally wide open. And I'll change pickups.
What does wide open mean?
I mean, just all the way up, on 10.
Okay.
On 10. So that makes a difference. I mean, whether it's, something like a Les Paul with humbucking pickups, or it's a Telecaster with single coil pickups. Single coil and a humbucking pickup is sort of the big distinction. And then there's smaller distinctions within that. And it's, again, there's a rabbit hole where you can go, there's companies that make thousands of different kinds of these things. And in most cases, the 1/10 of 1% of the people really can hear that under perfect conditions. And mostly it's for people who want to be fetishes about it. So that's the guitar part of it. Okay. The guitar is going to determine to some degree what the tone is. The other thing is, sorry, say again, Bert?
We haven't talked about the importance of color.
Well, color is really important. I do like a sunburst guitar, because I like it. Actually, yeah.
Wait, let me show you my artificial sunburst.
I mean, not for nothing, but it makes a difference.
Well, everything makes a difference. Actually,
See, I too
talk
much
about
black on the outside on this, but
yeah,
Did you do that yourself, Tom?
I made this, yeah.
Did you DIY it? That's awesome.
Yeah,
That's super cool.
yeah.
But
Uncle Jim helped me.
there's also things like, the type of wood that the guitar is made out of, what type of finish it has. If you use, this has got like polyurethane. The older guitars had nitrocellulose, which is a thinner, more brittle thing. So they say this deadens the sound. It's like, there's like
I don't buy that.
stuff about this. Like, is it true? Yeah. Does it matter? Can you work around it? Of course you can. So again,
I'm skeptical in a blind study, somebody could really pick that, the finish of the guitar out.
you could tell these are two different finishes, which one is nitro and which one is polyurethane, with the two
Yeah.
guitars set up exactly the same. Oh yeah, you can totally tell. Absolutely, you can tell.
Really?
But could you like turn the knob on the amp and make it go away? Of course you can.
Okay.
So again, the sound is inside your head. The sound is in your ears and it's in your hands. So you know the sound that you're going for, and that's what you're after. So that's guitars. That's the main tool. But for the kind of stuff we're talking about, also amps make a difference. So if you're listening to a particular artist, and I'll show you some examples here in a second. There's basically three flavors of amps.
Three? Only three?
Yeah, three. Only three. That's good wine. Basically, you have either the classic American sound. This is sort of the way they refer to it. The American sound is Fender amps. Okay, Fenders are, regardless of whether they're tube or they're not. The classic version is tube, but the solid state ones emulate the tubes ones. So for this purpose, it doesn't really matter. The Fender guitar sound, Fender amp sound rather, is really clear. It's really bright. It's really articulate. All the things that Leo was going for with the Telecaster, his amps are the same sort of thing. They're really, even when they distort sort of crunchy, sort of. They're a little brittle in their way. There's a lot of sharp edges in them in the distortion, but the Fender sound is a very clear, sort of clean. Think of the Ventures, think of the Beach Boys. That's the Fender sound. That's the classic Fender sound. And even when you think of like blues guys or Buffalo Springfield or people like that, that's a Fender sound. Okay. Contrasting that is the British sound, okay, which is basically Marshalls and then other amps like Marshalls. And the difference is because the tubes are different, but that's why.
Marshall, a British company?
Marshall's a British company. And the
Okay.
Marshall sound is warmer, fatter, even when it's distorting. It's got sort of smoother edges on it. It's a smoother distortion rather than the sort of a jagged biting distortion like a Fender would be. If you can compare, say, thinking of blues guitar players, so like Mike Bloomfield or something like that, American blues guitar players, okay? Their sound is really sort of stinging, where if you listen to British blues guitar players like Eric Clapton, Jimmy Page, people like that, it's a more, even Hendrix, who really played he played Marshall, so he played sort of a British rig, even though he's American. It's a rounder, warmer, fatter kind of sound, okay? And that's going to determine it. It's a little trickier to get a Marshall sound out of a Fender amp and a Fender sound out of a Marshall amp because they're sort of different animals. So that's trickier than getting a Les Paul sound out of a Stratocaster and vice versa, okay? Because the palette is a little bit different. The third one would be Vox, and Vox is the way people describe Vox, that's sort of the Beatles sound. That's the Tom Petty sound. That's the REM sound. And that's sort of, they refer to that kind of as like the jangle. It's really sort of jangly and sparkly and chimey, not real heavy bottom, not real resonant. And that's a particular sound. Beyond that, almost everybody else are emulating that. Those are kind of the three palettes. But which one you pick is going to matter. If you want to sound like Eric Clapton, it's harder to do that through a clean Fender amp without a bunch of pedals to sort of get you there. If you're one of those, you hear people who say, I'm just a plug the thing into the amp kind of guy. I don't use pedals, just plug it right in. Then you need to be picking the right amp in order to get the sound you're looking for, right? So amps make a difference. We could spend months talking about effects, effects pedals and those sorts of things, which we talked about with you last time, Court. When we talk about effects, sometimes effects are rack sort of things, sometimes effects are in the computer in my case, but essentially we're talking about what people think of as pedals. And there are distortion pedals, which make your guitar sound like it's going through an amp that's on 10, even though your amp is on 2. So it gives you that kind of round distortion sort of solo sort of sound. And there's some levels of EQ in there where you can make it brighter or less bright, edgier or not edgier. And there's literally hundreds of varieties of those kinds of things. There's things like reverb pedals, or it might be a Fender amp, it's built into the amp, which is just basically ambience. Like you're talking about the size of the room, Bill. That's what reverb does. It's basically how big is the room.
That's what I was thinking of.
Yeah. And then you have delay, which is different from reverb. Delay is actually sort of articulate, kind of, repeated whatever.
Like the edge.
Like the edge, and I'll show you a case of that. Or like the guy that played with Elvis with that slapback echo, which is a really particular sound for rockabilly stuff. It's got that kind of bap, bap, bap. It's like, every note he plays, it's got that slap on it, which is a really sort of one of the first. It's a Les Paul invention, like lots of other stuff. But you can do lots of things. Either the echo sort of gives this idea that there's more space around you, so it feels like it's in a bigger space. There's things like chorus, which you've heard of, which is basically a really, really, really tight delay, which makes it sound sort of shimmery. Things like, EQ.
What's the difference between reverb and chorus?
Well, reverb is just sort of this ambient sound. It's just sort of the sound of the room. So if you look at settings on some reverb pedals, that like the digital ones, the settings will read things like room, and you'll have different rooms, or you'll have halls, which would be bigger rooms like that, or right up to cathedrals. So you could have settings on, on the continuum of reverb. You could have something that would be, there's some ambience in my studio here. It's not a lot because it's a small room and I got a shitload of stuff on the walls that's sucking up all the vibrations. But it's not a dry room, which is what you would have in a typical recording studio, where there's things that are designed to absorb all that sound, and it should sound as flat as anything. Or if you plug something into your computer with no reverb on it, it's going to sound very, very dry. There's going to be no dimension to it at all, where reverb is the sound of the space that's performing in. So it could be something as small as this, which will have a bit of room sound, but not very much, to playing in St. Peter's, where there's an echo that will go on forever. That's all reverb. It's a continuum, okay? So it's essentially the size of the room and the nature of the stuff that's in the room that's absorbing the stuff. A room that's full of junk that's causing all these reflections is going to be more diffused than a big empty room. A big empty room will sound like, but why people sing in a bathroom, it's the reverb that they're going for. That's what they're listening for. So that kind of thing you hear is like, let's go practice our vocals. Come on, we're going to the bathroom, because it always sounds better because the tile reflects really, really well. So that's what reverb is like. What chorus is a kind of delay. If you start at its longest, that kind of hello, 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 the long delay. If you tighten that up to where it's like hello, hello, you tighten it up further to like what I said was a slapback, it could be hello, hello, hello. It's like very, very tight. If you tighten it even tighter than that to where the space between the delays are not distinguishable, that's where you're getting into chorus. Chorus is a kind of, and there's also something called modulation in there. And what modulation is you're actually wobbling stuff. So it sounds like there's a technique they use in recording vocals particularly, called double tracking. And what double tracking does, like when the Beatles did this, they would sing a lyric to a song, you know, yesterday, oh, my trouble seems so far away. And then they'd go back and they'd re-record the exact same thing separately. And you go, yesterday, oh, my trouble seems so far away. But because of human error, they wouldn't line up exactly. There'd be like, you know, little bits of difference, you know, so they would sort of wobble a little bit. Essentially, chorus is an artificial way of getting at that. Okay. So the classic chorus thing would be The Police, you know, where he's doing that kind of, what the hell song is it? Whatever song that is, that chang, chang, it's sort of chang, chang, you know, that's chorus. I mean, that's what that sound is about. If you want to sound like Andy Summers, that's the sound he's going for. Okay. So let's look at some examples. Let's listen to some examples. And then I'll see if I can pull up Andy Summers as well. So if you're looking for, like, see if, I hope you can hear this. Let me know if you can. Classic Telecaster sound, okay? Bright, articulate, twangy, that'd be the word I would use. Something like Buck Owens, all right? Listen to the fills. Hear
Yeah, it doesn't come through, Jim.
Hmm?
The audio really doesn't reproduce it, unfortunately.
That's, yeah. What I
Not
can do is I'll
over
give you a
Zoom.
list. So it's, anyway, what you hear with that is it's really bright, it's really articulate, it's really twangy. And also it's, I was talking about this before with the guys this afternoon. Partly the way, really before Eric Clapton was the guy that really changed this. When you go into the studio to record, it always sounded different than playing live, because live you turn everything up. And in the studio they say, oh, no, we want things to be really quiet, you know, so we can really hear it. So all the amps sound really sort of, they're not straining at all. They're not, you know, they're very articulate, they're very clean sounding, they're very sort of thin sounding. So a lot of the sounds of the guitars through the 50s into the 60s are really sort of thin. And what we're talking about is that Ron Howard movie about the Beatles touring that came out 2 or 3 years ago. Following that movie, we saw it in the theater. They showed the entire Beatles 1965, I think, Shea Stadium concert.
Mhm.
And what was striking about it, they're doing all the songs live that you've always heard them do, like, you know, Hard Day's Night and She Loves You and Help and all that kind of stuff. But whenever you heard them, they were always in a TV studio playing it live. So the sound was always sort of dialed down and the amps were sort of really kind of clean sounding, right? When you saw them playing at Shea Stadium, they had these Super Beatles, you know, like these 100-watt amps with 4 12-inch speakers, and everything was dymed. Everything is on 10. They're raging. They're absolutely raging. And you hear them play A Hard Day's Night through those amps, and it sounds like Cream playing them. I mean, it's just, the sound was just so much more powerful rather than what you heard them playing on TV, even though they're playing, you know, strong, and they're such a great live band, but it was, the sound was a little more tame compared to Shea Stadium and live. Shea Stadium, it's like the sound of those amps is just raging, and it's just, that's a powerful thing. So that's the reason a lot of this kind of stuff that you heard early on, and this Buck Owens stuff is a good example of that. That's a really thin, really kind of twangy sound for the guitar. If you listen to Eric Clapton, when he recorded with the Blues Breakers, this was during the Eric Clapton as God period. What he would do is, first of all, he figured out like a Les Paul with humbucking pickups through a Marshall tube amp on 10. That's what lead guitar sounds like. To me today, still, this is what lead guitar sounds like, right? And he went in and set up his stuff in the studio, and all the engineers are going, okay, we'll put this mics here, it's gonna be really good. And he said, okay, ready, good. And he hits the first note, and it's like, blah, you know, it's blowing everybody else back. And they're out like, you're like crazy, like, no, you can't do that, you got to turn it down. He said, no. You fix it up there. This is the sound that I play with. This is the volume I play with. This is what I have to do to get the sound. Because these amps had no master volume. What a master volume is a knob that came along later, which lets you set the power tubes at the volume they need to be. And then there's like a volume control that turns everything down so you don't blow the neighbors out. Without a master volume, in order to get the sound you want, you have to turn everything up. Like those AC30s, the Vox amps the Beatles used and I used to play with. The sweet spot on those amps to get that sort of really chimey kind of sound is about 6.5. That amp at 6.5 will punch a hole through the back wall. And it didn't have a master volume, so there's no workaround for that. So anyway, this is John Mayall. Excuse me, this is Eric Clapton with John Mayall. So hopefully you'll hear some of this.
It's hard to hear it, but I remember the song though, so.
Yeah.
That's all just pentatonic stuff, right?
Oh, it's all pentatonic. All Clapton plays is pentatonic stuff. But that tone, hear how different that is. And you can hear at one point, he hits that note and lets it ring and it starts to feed back. That made engineers crazy in 1965. Like that's that loud.
Is that
but
why
that-
they would put mics in front of smaller amps and then feed it into the PA?
Oh, that's exactly why. Yeah, that's nobody plays with, those like Marshall stacks anymore. Nobody does that. In the late 60s, up to about 1970, about, when at Woodstock, Crosby, Stills, and Nash come out and they're playing, they have no monitors. When the Beatles played Shea Stadium, they have no monitors. They can't hear their vocals at all. Everything was, the PAs weren't powerful enough at that point to really fill the house. So they had these gigantic amplifiers and the amplifiers were filling the house. So basically the amplifiers are raging and you couldn't hear the drums mostly, and you couldn't hear the vocals. All you hear was guitars, which of course is fine with me. Because, you don't need vocals. I mean, lyrics are just spacers between solos, really. But that's what changed. What changed, and ironically, who was instrumental in making that evolution is the Grateful Dead. The Grateful Dead pretty much were not just instrumental; they were like centrally instrumental in advancing PA technology. I mean, they basically spent all their money on that, through into the 80s. But figured out if we can mic all the amplifiers and have a PA system that's powerful enough to send that out into the house cleanly, we don't need gigantic amplifiers. We can do it with smaller amplifiers. And even in terms of recording, Clapton did this in the studio. When he recorded Layla, he was playing through a Fender Champ, was about that big on 10, and then they just mic it, and it'd sound much bigger. So that philosophy of, you can get a big sound out of a small amp sort of came out of this period because people didn't know how to record this kind of stuff. So yeah, everything on stage now is mic'd, and what controls the sound out in the house is the sound guy out in the house, just mixing his board and, doing all the rest of that. And then what you need on stage is enough level, your guitar either coming through the monitors, which you can do, or enough sound coming through your amplifier so you can hear what you're doing while you can also hear everybody else that's on the stage. So ideally what you want is a sound on stage that sounds like what people are hearing out in the room, and that requires a good mix. When Cream was playing, and they're playing through 2 100-watt Marshall stacks wide open, in a big arena. I mean, Jack Bruce and Eric Clapton could barely hear each other because the two of them were so loud that it blocked out what the other guy was doing. So, I mean, they were almost playing independent of what the other ones were doing. It's just,
They must have hearing damage.
oh, deaf as stone. Stephen Stills is as deaf as a hammer. He's as deaf as Dad.
Really?
That's how high that bar is. Yeah, seriously. I mean, of course they do. I'm happy to say my farewell tour, road check of all the things I've gotten done, including the colonoscopy and the heart scan and the hearing check and my eyes check. My hearing is, I don't need a hearing aids yet. Right, in 5 years I might, but not yet. But yeah, I saw it's like, I'll tell you exactly where the hearing loss is going to be. It's going to be about 3,500, 4,000 hertz, and it's going to be about 8,000, 9,000 hertz. He goes, yeah, how'd you know that? This is because that's where guitar amps live, and that's where cymbals live. So that's why half the drummers that I know have hearing aids, is because of the cymbals. The cymbals are really the thing that really does the damage. But yeah, people don't need big amps anymore. They really don't. You don't have to play on stage loud the way you used to, because the PA guy fixes all that. It's like, what I do when I play with the Bats is I'll have my amp set up and I'll have my amp facing me. It wouldn't even be facing anybody else. It would be facing away from the rest of the band and away from the house, and it's facing me with a mic on it, so I can hear exactly what I want to hear. And then I tell the sound guy, fix it up front, fix it in the monitors. And I say, Jim's too loud. I said, talk to the sound guy. It's like, I don't have any control of that. So it's like the perfect solution. Yeah, it's really changed everything. I miss a little of the rawness that, it's hearing a band in a club, the visceral rawness of that, where you're hearing the amplifiers without a bunch of mics going through this kind of system. There's a certain thrill to that. I mean, I like that a lot.
Yeah.
That's kind of a cool thing. So that's Telecaster, that's Les Paul. Took a Stratocaster, Buddy Holly. Oops. It's just plain strumming. So really clear. Okay. As opposed to Jimi Hendrix. This is also a good example of that British versus American, Fender versus Marshall tone I was talking about. Hear how much rounder that is? To the degree you can hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. So that. But then when people talk about Stratocasters, like this is like that's sort of between in between the 2 and the 4 setting on a Stratocaster. The ironic thing is that was never designed to be there. That sound didn't get discovered until like the late 60s. Hendrix, Clapton, people like that figured out if you put the switch back, the first Strat that I had, which is 71, 72, something like that, it didn't have 5 settings on that switch that it had. It had 3 settings that had like a Telecaster, 1 middle and that. What you would do is you would balance it sort of between the 2 to get the 2 pickups doing that. And then eventually people started selling them that were 5 settings. Then eventually Fender said, okay, we just do it 5 now. So everything's with a 5 setting now. But that setting, that kind of the 2 pickup between that was never designed into it. That was like a happy accident, that whole thing. But it's an iconic sound. And when people talk about, they talk about it as like that out of phase sound, and it's literally not out of phase. It just sort of sounds a little like that. When people talk about that sound, that sort of in between Strat sound, they're not talking just about that sound. They're literally talking about this song. This is the song that embodies that sound. And it's an iconic sound. And you can't really get that easily. Like you can't get that on a typical Telecaster. You can't get that on Grace's Telecaster because she's only got 2 pickups. So there's no middle pickup to do it. I put a middle pickup in this one so I can get that. So if I, and I got a switch here that turns that on. So if I do, that's just a bridge pickup. If I turn on the pickup, hear the difference?
Hard
That
to
you-
hear over
Yeah.
over Zoom, unfortunately.
You can't get that sound out of a 2 pickup guitar. If you want to sound like Mark Knopfler, you kind of have to have 3 pickups, or you got to have a Telecaster, or excuse me, you have to have a Stratocaster. That's one of the limitations. So when we start listening to, how do you get that? How does he get that sound? The starting thing is he's playing really cleanly, playing through a twin, I think, but he's playing really, really cleanly, and he's playing a Stratocaster with that pickup setting. That's 95% of that sound. And then you can quibble about, other little things and EQ things, but that's either you have that setup, a clean amp and a Strat on the number 2 setting to get that sound, or you don't have that sound, okay? The jazz thing I showed you about the Telecaster, yeah, you can make that. This is probably the exception to the rule, that this is one sound that it takes that sort of thing to get that sound, right? Couple of the quickies. The Byrds, this Rickenbacker 12-string. Listen to it. Here's the 12 string coming in right here. There's a couple of things I'll point out. There's 2 things going on there. One is that the Rickenbacker 12-string is kind of the quintessential 12. It's the same thing that George used in the Beatles. But also the thing that he figured out, that McGuinn figured out, is that you hear how flat it is. There's no dynamics to it at all. It's just sort of like, it's almost like, not hard to describe. It's just sort of, it's almost like a saxophone almost, right? That's the sound. So what he did was he put it in a compressor, which is a device that sort of squashes everything. So there's no dynamics to it. It's just like everything is like in there. So it sustains a long time and is really clean. It's also really bright, really, that sort of crystal clear. That's that sound. That's the REM sound. That's the George Harrison sound, that Rickenbacker thing. The last one I'll show you.
With a compressor on all of them?
Oh, well, for the Rickenbacker 12-string, yeah, compressor. It's in the case of McGuinn, 2 compressors. And then directly into the board. He's not even going into an amp. He's plugging straight into the board, to get it that clean. So there's nothing else in its way. And the last one I was going to show you is, U2. Oops, come on. And what he's doing here, he's got layers of echoes that are just, several echo units that are cascading over each other.
Yeah, we're losing a lot of that.
And the thing is, because he's using those echo units, what he's really playing is sort of like da 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 da, and the echo's going da 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 da, and they're overlapping each other. So that's kind of a trick in its way. It's a pretty good trick, actually. He sort of invented that. Yeah, Court, question?
Have you seen so there's a documentary, I think it's called It Might Get Loud.
It Might Get Loud, yes.
Yeah, so it's Jack White, The Edge, and then I can't remember who the
Jimmy
third.
Page.
Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
Jimmy Page.
Yeah. But they dig pretty deep into that.
Oh, they do. And the 2 pieces of that thing. Have you seen it, Tom?
No, I'm
Oh,
writing it down.
Yeah, write it down. It's called This Might Get Loud. It's wonderful. The 2 scenes in it that are the most wonderful part of it is where they do individual stories about the 3 of them, and then they take the 3 of them and they put them on a sound stage, like almost like a boxing ring, right, with amplifiers and their guitars, and then they just talk and show stuff. And the thing where Edge is in his studio and he's got like a rack, 6 feet high, maybe 2 racks, 6 feet high of like delay units and stuff like that to get the thing. And he goes, this is what I do. I go like, and And then it goes, and it's just like, that's how he does the trick. You have to have, you can't get, there's nothing in this room that I can get that. That's a tool, it's an effect pedal thing that I need in order to simulate that. And it's doable, you just need to know that you need that. The other scene that's really a cool thing in the movie is where they're asking Jimmy Page about something and he plays something like it, and, you know, he plays some iconic Led Zeppelin song, and the Edge, who's like a major international star, and Jack White is a pretty big deal as well. They're sitting there like middle school kids, like watching this, you know, the guitar guy going, like, you know, it's, you know, it's charming as anything. It's really, it's wonderful, but it's a really good insight into how people get at tone, how they get, you know, I'm not one of those guys. There's lots of people that are. I'm not one of those guys that you know, genuflects at the altar of Jimmy Page as the greatest guitar player ever. You know, I don't think he's half the guitar player that Jeff Beck is. But what I will say about Jimmy Page, because he's, you know, he worked as a, you know, studio guy when he was like 14. You know, he's on zillions of records before he even joined the Yardbirds. You know, so he's, you know, he's well accomplished and all the rest of that. He's a really, really good producer, and he has a really, really, really good ear for tone, and picks the tones of the instruments so that they lay in the mixes really clearly and all the rest of that. He's really good at that. If you listen to some of the Led Zeppelin records, I mean, the sort of fallacies that you have, and he's a really good example of this, actually. You always think of Led Zeppelin as being this big, you know, sort of power rock band. And if you go and play a lot of these amps like in the music stores, or the amps like the amp that you've got, Tom, the Boss amp that you've got, and Bill, I think you have digital effects in your amp too, do you not?
I do.
Yeah, you know, if you listen to like the distortions things and those, they sound great in a music store, but they don't sound really very good when you're playing with people because it's usually too much generally. And if you listen to the tone of the guitars on the first Led Zeppelin record, Led Zeppelin 1, I guess, you think, oh, he's playing these gigantic stacks of amplifiers. He's playing, you know, his big Les Paul. He played that whole album with a Telecaster, for starters, and he's playing through a little, you know, sort of a combo amp. And if you listen to his tone, you realize that, you know, it's not really that distorted. You know, it's not a lot of fuzz and buzz and roar. It's nothing like, you know, like what you think of as like a metal band where it's just like raging kind of roar. The tones are really, they're not clean, but they're not terribly distorted. And even on the second album, if you listen to the tones, Rolling Stones, same thing. A lot of those kind of classic bands, the tones are not really terribly overdriven. They've got some hair on them, but there's still a lot of articulation in them. It's not, I mean, Hendrix, some of his stuff it gets pretty distorted, but even a lot of the Hendrix stuff is only modestly so. So usually, you know, less is more in a lot of those kinds of things. It's, you know, turn the distortion down, you know, and you'll hear more of the guitar, and that'll be usually closer to what the intention was. So it's easy to think of, you know, big rock songs as having these big heavy tones. A lot of times they really don't. Derek and the Dominos, as an example, you know, you think, God, the tones in that are so great and they sound so big and powerful. And Clapton and Duane Allman were playing through champs. They're playing through like amplifiers this big with an 8-inch speaker in it on 10, but still, you don't need a big amp to get a big sound, depending on how you EQ it and you mic it and those sorts of things. And even at that, you want a sound that's kind of is a little more articulate. So I guess, I mean, that's kind of a broad scope of the kind of things that go into making tones. And we're about out of time anyway.
Let's talk about next week. What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think what I'd like to do next week, and Grace, you know, Grace is good about doing her homework. I said, let everybody pick a song that we'll unpack and figure out, well, where does that sound come from and how do you get to it? And she gave me one from a band, it was a Big Star, I think. I said, okay, give me a song. I don't even, I don't know anything about big song. But
Right
pick a
there.
song. Pick a song. You gonna make chicken, Tom?
She's calling me for dinner. Right?
Yeah.
8 o'clock, gotta go.
Gotta go.
But,
Pick a song. Give me a heads up. Before next week. Give me a heads up on what song it is. I'll cue it up, and then we can kind of go and say, all right, let's talk about everybody kind of. All right, what do you hear in this? What are the clues? How do you unpack this kind of stuff to figure out, well, what kind of guitar does it sound like? What kind of amp does it sound like? How distorted is it? Are there effects on it? What effects are there on it? Those sorts of things.
that's a good
What's the
idea.
difference between a phaser and a flanger? Those sorts of things. And we'll sort of look at it as kind of an ear training thing, so we can kind of unpack it. Because it's great to play the song, but if you play the song and you got the tone right, it's like that's a whole lot more persuasive.
Yeah,
especially
Also,
if
we
you're-
should talk about how to figure out the chords in the song too.
Oh yeah, we'll do that too. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We'll do that too. So pick some songs.
Watch that,
Everybody
watch
pick
that video I sent around if you guys
I
haven't
did.
done it
I
yet.
did. It was actually very good. Something you want to talk. I was going to throw this back at you, Tom. It's like in the context of that thing. This is, I don't know if you guys saw it, Courtney and Bill,
Yeah.
about tempered scales and that sort of stuff. So then, Tom, how does pitch correction factor into that in all the pop music stuff now? What do they correct to?
They correct to equal temperament. I'm pretty sure.
You would hope, although there's
They
unlike
have to
pop-
because they would, otherwise they wouldn't hit the keys of the piano.
except they're not. I don't use equal temperament on my pedal steel. I've got my tuner set.
But that's another universe.
Well, it is, but that's the point. I mean, it's whatever your ears hear. What sounds right is right. But yeah, everybody pick a song. And
Okay,
then come back. Give me a heads up beforehand, and then Tuesday we'll come back and let's unpack them, and we'll do some actual ear training exercises. Okay.
all right, dudes.